Good morning, everyone. Tonight is VBS, and everybody that you invite to VBS, every child that you bring, every parent of that child, be sure that you invite them also. Next weekend, next Sunday evening, we're going to have a big get-together, big fish fry. We want to meet all these people and mingle with these people and make them feel welcome and get to know them. So be sure that you invite everybody that comes to VBS to the big fish fry next Sunday night and get together as well. Brother John Panisi will be meeting his class in here in the auditorium today. The fellowship hall has been set up for VBS. It's all decorated. The people have done a beautiful job of decorating the building, so every other class, I think, will meet in its normal place. Well, we're on I Doubt It's for several weeks here, and we'll probably do a couple more I Doubt It's before we get done. It's interesting to me that the variety of people that we've had respond in the box and personally and to tack notes on my door and everything to express the things that are hard for them to believe. It's also interesting the age range of these people. There was one person in the 70s range that came and expressed very deep doubts about the biblical story of creation and just expressed that they do believe in the theory of evolution and that this has caused great conflict in their heart and their faith. This is a person in their 70s. There's another teenager that wrote me the cutest note, and it was really sincere about dinosaurs and evolution and how can these two things go together, and they were confused. And I think there are a lot of people that I've visited with over the years that really have a problem with this area. Because if evolution is true, as we're going to talk about it today, then we're the biggest bunch of hypocrites on earth for singing all these songs we've just sung, which can't possibly be right, any of them. So we're going to talk about this today. Now, you're supposed to have a joke and a poem in a sermon. Now, I may or may not have the poem, but what did the little fishy say to his friends about evolution? Well, he said, "Come on, it's just a short walk." Just let it simmer for a minute. Okay. Well, see how that went over there, Brother Joe. Okay. Believe me, evolutionists take their evolution very seriously, so let's talk for a little bit. Number one on your outline in your bulletin, the theory of evolution, and it is a theory. They will tell you that it's not a theory, that it's a fact. Let me be very specific. Evolution means change. It means adaptation. Evolution is a fact within species. That means that over time and in different environments, certain species within that species will adapt. They will change in certain ways. Evolution is a fact within species. There are changes and adaptations that take place over time within a species because of environment and all kinds of other factors. But evolution has never even come remotely close to proving that it explains the origin of the species, that it is the way that all biological species came into existence. That is a theory, an unproven theory, and the basis of a philosophy that we'll talk about in just a moment. Evolution is based on the philosophy called naturalism or materialism. This is assumed before we ever begin. Assumption number one of the evolutionists is that only matter is real. See, we've sung today, as the Bible says, that the heavens declare the glory of God and the firmament showeth His handiwork. But the evolutionist does not believe in God, nor does he believe in anything spiritual, anything other than matter. Atoms, see, molecules, stuff. That's all that there is, see. It's assumed before we start. What do you assume about the nature of reality? What do you assume? Next slide, if you would, please. Do you assume naturalistic materialism? That means that the only thing that exists in the universe is matter, that there's just stuff, that there's nothing else but stuff in the universe. Evolution, as Charles Darwin preached it and taught it in his book, The Origin of the Species. By the way, how many in here have ever cracked the cover of The Origin of the Species and actually sat down and read? Okay. I figured you had, and okay, very good, very good. All right, it's not just something you want to read on a Saturday night that'll keep you up all night. I'll tell you, it might put you to sleep, but it's very involved. And Charles Darwin's book is called The Origin of the Species. Now listen, by means of This is the way they originated. This is the way it happened. By means of natural selection. Natural means not what? Supernatural. There was no mind, no purpose, no direction, no nothing. It was natural, completely matter doing all this by itself. Selection, see? Now, he did all kinds of experiments with genetics, like breeding, and within species showed all kinds of little changes that everybody understands exist. But there's never been any proof in that book or otherwise about the origin of the species by natural selection. The second assumption of evolutionists is that there is a process in nature and that process is in progress. Brother J.D. Thomas, years ago at Abilene Christian, pointed out to me the importance of G.W.F. Hegel, the philosopher, in Charles Darwin's work and Karl Marx's work and the work of so many others. Hegel was a philosopher of history that said there's a process going on. It's happening in history. And the process looks like this. There is some kind of an event that happens in history. That's called the thesis. Some kind of an event happens. Then there is a reaction of some kind to that event. That's called the antithesis, okay? Then there's a resolution or an outcome to those two things, and that's called the synthesis. And that outcome is always positive or better or higher in some way. Now, Karl Marx took Hegel's ideas, and he came up with the utopian philosophy of communism, that if history kept progressing and everything kept getting better and better and better, you'd have this perfect utopian communism eventually. That was his way of applying Hegelian philosophy. Darwin, on the other hand, said that there must be this process going on in nature. It's like nature is just a machine chugging along, and an event happens, and then something reacts to it in nature, and the outcome is always positive. It's always better. It's always more developed. And so he applied this to nature and came up with his theory. Darwin's Origin of the Species came out in 1859, quite a bit after Hegel's death, and his theory can be called mechanistic evolution. That is, that the lowest forms of life, by strict natural chance, evolved over millions and millions and millions and millions of years. By the way, one of the things Darwin needed for his theory was many, many multiplied millions of years, because the chances of this stuff accidentally happening are so small, and it takes multiplied millions of years to even make it remotely feasible that things like this could possibly happen. If you've read Darwin, you remember when you read that as he would discuss some experiment, he would say, I believe that this means that X or Y could have happened, and surely must have happened, and surely might have happened. And he used terms like, it must have certainly have been, and things like that, all the way through his book to express beliefs that he had about things that he thought but hadn't proven. He also calls natural selection the doctrine of natural selection in his own book. He calls it the doctrine of natural selection. And he describes in the book how natural selection might have or could have developed the various species. And of course, he never did demonstrate that with any kind of concrete proof. This process that is supposedly in progress in nature requires millions and millions of years. Now, Darwin stated throughout his work that this could only have possibly happened very, very gradually. Stephen Gould and others in science in recent years have shown that species seem to appear in the fossil record very immediately. He calls it punctuated equilibrium, and says the gradual type thing doesn't make any sense at all. But the evolutionary timetable became very, very sacred to evolutionists, because the only way you could ever even imagine biological evolution and origin of the species happening was for millions and hundreds of millions of years to take place. So one of the things that evolutionists will defend vigorously, most vigorously, is the evolutionary timetable. It had to take millions and millions and millions and millions of years. Number 2 on your outline, the idea of divine creation is also based on certain basic assumptions. Unlike the evolutionists, we do not assume that matter is the only thing in existence. You can't prove, they'll say you can't prove empirically that there's a God. You also can't prove that matter is the only thing in existence. So you have to believe in that. So is it possible that things exist beyond the physical? The Bible speaks of things that eye has not seen and ear has not heard, things that have never entered into the mind of man. Do you believe in those things? John 1:18, no man has ever seen God at any time. Well, then how do we know that He exists? Have you ever seen a human soul? I haven't. But I've been in the room when somebody dies. And I've watched the miraculous change that comes over a person when the human soul leaves the body. And I've looked at that body and haven't even recognized the person that was there because the essence, the spiritual essence of that person is gone. I can't weigh it or measure it, but I know it's there, but it's not natural, it's supernatural. Does mind exist? Do you really think at all? Do you really decide at all? Or is mind just an illusion? See? Mind is a spiritual thing. It's not just brain, it's mind that we're talking about. So the first assumption of creationists is that there's more to reality than just matter. The Bible says, in the beginning, God created. Now think about that. In the beginning, there was a start to everything. God. Now, when you say that word, God, you've already gone past the philosophy of naturalism. God is supernatural. God is a spirit, John 4:24. He is above nature, okay? Created. Look at the word created. What's in that word? To create is a personal thing. To create is a purposeful thing. To create means to design something with a mind, see? In the beginning, God created. Well, let's compare for a moment creation and naturalistic evolution. First of all, creation. Creationists believe in a young earth. They do not believe in an earth, or particularly, let's be more specific, they do not believe in biological life on earth that goes back multiplied hundreds of millions of years. Creationists believe that creation by God began perfectly organized and designed, and through decay is digressing into less organized, disorganized. Look up the second law of thermodynamics or entropy, and all those things are happening. How many things do you see in nature that are getting more and more organized all the time instead of more and more disorganized? Creationists believe in purposeful design. When they see a similar structure in the arm bones of a person and the wing of a bird, they don't say, well, this one descended from that one. They say, hey, looks like the same engineer designed both of those things. They're very similar, you see. Creationists believe in mind over matter. We believe that mind existed first and created matter, and that there was purpose and direction in creation. Creationists believe in divine intervention. Now, I want to stop us right here. I want to ask you, regardless of how old or young you are, wherever your background is, I want to ask you, do you believe in the possibility at all of divine intervention in anything? In other words, let's get basic. Do you believe that God exists, and can actually do anything? If not, what are you doing here? See, but see, this is really a basic point. Do you believe in divine intervention? Natural evolution, on the other hand, believes in an old earth, millions and millions and millions and multiplied millions of years. Why? Because it's necessary for that to be true in order for evolution to be true. See? Now, a lot of the methods that we use to date things are based on certain assumptions. If you accept those assumptions, you accept the methods as valid. One of those assumptions is uniformitarianism, which means that the processes that are happening right now today have been happening at the exact same rates all the way back in ad infinitum in time. What does that do for cataclysmic events that might come into history, like the Great Flood or other things like that? Okay, but evolutionists believe that things came from chaos to highly organized without any mind or purpose. They believe in mindless random selection. Remember Darwin's book, which is still the Bible, even though various aspects of it have been learned better about in science. The origin of the species by means of natural, that means no God, no mind, no designer, no nothing, natural selection. Okay, so random. You ever looked at a flower? Have you ever looked close at a bee? Have you ever looked at the human body? Have you ever thought about the brain? How random does that seem to you? Matter only is what they believe exists. You can't really have it both ways. And uniform processes that we've talked. So there is this machine that's running along. It's just chugging along. Like Hegel said, there's a process and it's in progress. The machine is going. Well, who made the machine? Nobody made the machine. It just made itself. Who's driving the machine? Nobody's driving the machine. It's just chugging along. And it's getting better and better every day in every way. See, that's really what we're asked to believe. The second assumption of creationists is that the design in creation demands a designer. DNA research has really blown this field open for some amazing discussions with creation. When you get into DNA research, this double helix and all the things that are hidden in it, you know, you get into the coding in every cell, in every piece of tissue. You've got DNA of all these animals, and the coding is already there for everything about the animal. How did the coding get there? How did this intricate coding about you and your eye color and hair color and your height and your physical characteristics and maybe even your personality, how did the coding get in there if there's no design or no designer? Oh, it was just random. It just kind of fell together over all those millions and millions of years. Okay, number 3 on your outline today. Man has a place in both of these philosophical systems. Young people, don't let your people in your schools tell you that evolution is a fact. Understand this, evolution is a fact within species. When they say evolution is a fact, they mean you should accept it as fact as the way that the species themselves originated, and that's far from a fact. That's a religion based on the assumptions of naturalism. What is man's place in this? Well, man is created in God's image to the creationist. Genesis 1:26, let us make man in our image. Ezekiel 18:4, man is an immortal soul, and his soul belongs to his creator. He's intelligent. He makes choices. Do you realize, those of you that may believe in evolution, do you realize that if evolution is true, you have no free will at all? It's impossible for you to have a free will. If evolution is true, you're part of the machine. You don't make any decisions. You're just a cog in the wheel. You're just turned like every other piece. There's nobody driving you, just like there's nobody driving anything else. You're not responsible for anything you do. See? There is absolutely no free will. There can't possibly be. In psychology, the outcome of this is behavioralism. Behavioralism believes that man is strictly a part of the machine and has no soul, has no free will, is not responsible for anything, see? But the Bible teaches that we are made in God's image and that God has put all things under our feet and holds us responsible for our behavior. Secondly, the evolutionary system puts man in his place as a highly developed primate mammal. See, we're no different than any of the other animals, not just the monkeys, but all the rest of them. Man is a creature driven by environment. He's driven by impulse like every other animal, and instinct. He's part of nature's machine. He has no mind. He has no soul. He's going nowhere. He has no meaning. He has no purpose, because purpose implies a mind. And if there's purpose, there has to be a mind. But if there's no mind, there cannot possibly be any purpose. Now, I wish I should have brought the note that this young person wrote, but the young person said, you know, I got problems with the dinosaurs. And he or she, whoever it was, wrote, you know, the Bible, I don't remember the Bible saying anything about the dinosaurs. And weren't the dinosaurs supposed to live like way before man existed? And how in the world do you square that with biblical creation? And could you please help me, confused young person? Which brings us to point number 4. Dinosaurs fit into the biblical account of creation. Many see dinosaurs as a challenge to biblical creation. I guess some people deny that dinosaurs existed. I don't know who they would be. There's plenty of dinosaur bones around that prove that dinosaurs existed. But the Bible doesn't mention them, does it? Or does it mention them? Well, let's look at A on our outline. But didn't dinosaurs live millions of years before man and other mammals in the evolutionary timetable? And if you want to get evolutionary people upset, mess with their timetable. Their timetable is so sacred to them, because if you mess with the timetable, you're messing with the whole thing. In their timetable, dinosaurs became extinct 65 million years ago. That's in their timetable. Man didn't come along until roughly 6 million years ago, 5 or 6 million years ago, and that wasn't man like we know it. That was just kind of whoever these creatures were that were kind of bent over and had funny skulls and all that kind of stuff. But they believe that the first tiny mammals, like mice and stuff, were just beginning to evolve in the time that dinosaurs were becoming extinct, and then mammals began to develop on the tree, and then way down there 5 or 6 million years ago, hominids, or I guess upright folk, began to walk around. And about 200,000 years ago, they believe, people kind of like us began to live on the face of the earth. But what does the Bible say? Let's go back to what the Bible said. By the way, those of you that believe, and I want in all kindness to say this, those of you that believe that you can take evolution in this hand, I'm talking about naturalistic evolution as the means of the origin of the species. You can take that in this hand, and you can take Holy Scripture in that hand, and you can marry the two and live happily ever after. You're way off base. That's not going to happen. See? It's our culture making us feel stupid that makes us want to do that, see? And there's no reason for it. Okay, what does the Bible say? Genesis 1:24. And God said, this is day 6 of creation, by the way, let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, livestock, creatures that move along the ground, and wild animals, each according to its kind. Now, would dinosaurs be wild animals? Would they be creatures that move along the ground? I mean, I don't know why not. Genesis 1:27 on that same day says, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. And then verse 31 says, and God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the 6th day. So this says that man and animals were created at the same time in creation. How can that be, preacher? Because dinosaurs were extinct 65 million years ago. How do you know that? Well, because everybody knows the evolutionary timetable says that dinosaurs were extinct 65 million years ago, and so it was impossible for man and dinosaurs to live on the earth together, right? Well, verse 11 of Exodus 20 says, in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and earth and the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. You say, preacher, do you seriously want us to believe in a 6-day creation? Let me ask you another question. And I'm not saying that that there's not a little room in Genesis 1:1 for a tiny bit of wiggle room, but listen to this. Do you believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead? And how in the world could you believe in something that crazy? That seems supernatural to me. Do you actually sit here? We took the Lord's Supper a little while ago, and we celebrated the death of the incarnate Word. Wait a minute. Do you believe that a child could be born without a daddy, without a virgin, and without a father, without artificial insemination or anything like that? You really believe in a virgin birth? That's craziness. That's supernatural, isn't it? Do you believe in the miracles of Jesus? You believe he turned water into wine, put that dude's ear back on? You believe in that kind of stuff? Do you believe that God parted the Red Sea? Do you believe in the great plagues? Wait a minute now. What's the difference in that and what we're talking about here? It's supernatural. And people laugh at us for believing in things that are not natural. It's a philosophical thing because we don't go along with the religion. There's a lot of evidence that suggests that man and dinosaurs coexisted on Earth. Preacher, now you've really lost your mind. Oh, really? Well, stick with me just a second. First of all, did you know that mammals lived with and fed on dinosaurs? You're crazy, preacher. No, honestly, The Chinese, in the year 2004 late, discovered a skeleton of a large mammal, and inside of that mammal was a dinosaur that mammal had eaten. This blew the minds of a number of people. It was published in Nature magazine, January 13, 2005. Paleontologist Ming Jin of the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, a very pro-evolutionist institution, said himself, he was one of the authors of the article, "This new evidence gives us a drastically new picture." Wait a minute, evolutionary timetable. Dinosaurs were supposed to have died out 65 million years ago, and the only mammals that were beginning to evolve were mice, and then millions and millions of years later, mammals and man developed, didn't they? But then how could a big old mammal be eating a dinosaur and have it in his belly? It was a small dinosaur, but a dinosaur nonetheless. Well, that just doesn't make sense, does it? Unless their timetable might be off a bit. Or number two on this deal. Have you ever heard of the Ta Prohm temple carvings in Cambodia? 800 AD approximately, there was a Buddhist temple built in Cambodia. The jungle covered it up. It was so covered with roots and vines they couldn't see it. When they discovered it, they used industrial strength Roundup, and they killed a lot of this stuff, and they got down to the temple, and they began to look at the carvings on the temple. What is this animal on the next slide? The carvings on that ancient temple had monkeys, and they had deer, and they had this thing. Now the monkeys and the deer and all the other animals were real, but what is that rascal in the middle and the carving? It looks to most people like a stegosaurus. But how in the world could these builders of that ancient temple know anything about a stegosaurus? Because doesn't everybody know that dinosaurs died 65 million years before human beings ever came along? Well, that can't be real. It can't be right. It just must not be, right? Okay. Let's go to number three. You ever heard of the Anasazi Indians in the American West and Southwest? They lived in pueblos in the American Southwest. We have these kind of petroglyphs in the Grand Canyon Basin, and this place near Blanding, Utah is called Kachina Bridge. It's one of the natural bridges. And they're right around this petroglyph. All these petroglyphs are there together, and there's all kinds of men and animals and everything. And one of the animals is this dude right here. What is that thing that those Anasazi Indians drew? I think I know what it is. And if it is what I think it is, then how in the world would those Anasazi Indians know how to draw it? If they had never heard of one or seen one, or if it had never existed in their experience. Well, that's a puzzler. That's got me and a whole bunch of other people scratching their heads. Number four, have you ever heard of the Ica burial stones in Peru? Dr. Javier Cabrera of Lima, Peru, in the year 1961 was given an ancient Inca burial stone as a present. They found these in the tombs of the ancient Incas. And they gave him one as an honorary present, and he looked at it, and since this guy was scientifically savvy and archaeologically savvy, on the one that they gave him, this isn't the one, by the way, there was a fish depicted on that thing that had been extinct, as far as scientists knew, for many, many eons of years. But here was this Inca burial stone that had an accurate carving of that fish on it. And he was shocked and said, how in the world could this be? How could this fish be pictured on this stone? I need some more of these. He said, I got to find these things. So they raided tombs and brought him others, from these Inca burial tombs. And this and some of these others are some of the stones that they found. Now, those evolutionary sites that you'll get on that will try to attack this evidence will tell you that fakes have been made. And that's true. There have been fakes made. But these rocks are a form of andesite, gray to black volcanic rock. Very hard mineral that would make etching quite difficult. It has a patina, or a covering, almost like shellac, of natural oxidation on it. Laboratories in Germany have authenticated the incisions that make up these carvings as extremely ancient. The fakes in the grooves, they don't have this oxidation on them. You can't fake that, see? And the ones that are real are real, and that's all there is to it. Well, what is this animal on this stone? And what was the animal on the last one there? And what do we have pictured right along with these animals? What is that creature with the animal? That looks to me like a man. But that's impossible, isn't it? How could the ancient Incas, number one, draw dinosaurs? And number two, why in the world would they be drawing dinosaurs and human beings on the same burial stones? Well, the Incas say that the stones were to tell kind of a little story about the person's life that they were talking about. But how could this be if the timetable is right? I'm just saying. All right, what about the Acambaro dinosaurs? In 1945, German archaeologist Waldemar Julsrud was in Mexico, and he discovered clay figurines buried at the foot of a mountain called El Toro there. And these clay figurines that were buried there were actually figurines of dinosaurs. Weird, huh? Well, they sent fragments of these, broken pieces of these, to the University of Pennsylvania lab and Teledyne labs. And the labs both dated these at, hold on to your seats now, 2,500 BC. Let's let that gel for a minute. That's back there around Abraham or a little before, you know. Wait a minute now. Didn't you say 65 million? No, 2,500 BC. So they really blinked their eyes, and they sent them 8 more samples, and they validated the dating on 8 more samples. Then guess what? After informing the labs that the samples they had dated were pieces of dinosaur figurines, both the University of Pennsylvania and the other lab withdrew their results immediately and said, we withdraw these cannot possibly be correct. And they did another study on them and tried to get an older date, and they came out with 9,000 BC. But 9,000 BC is a long, long ways from 62 million years, isn't it? Isn't there a lot of difference in those times? So there's been all kinds of things like this, and we could go on forever. Does the Bible say anything about dinosaurs? Well, does it? Let's look at Job 41 again. Can you pull in the Leviathan? What's a Leviathan? Well, see, different versions try to figure this out. Some people will say it's a crocodile. Some people say it's something else. But if you really read this, it's certainly poetic. But let's read this passage. Can you pull in the Leviathan with a fishhook or tie down its tongue with a rope? Can you put a cord through his nose or pierce his jaw with a hook? I will not fail to speak of his limbs, his strength, and his graceful form. Who can strip off his outer coat? Who could approach him with a bridle? Who dares open the doors of his mouth, ringed about with fearsome teeth? His back has rows of shields tightly sealed together. Each is so close to the next that no air can pass between. They are joined fast to one another. They cling together and cannot be parted. His snorting throws out flashes of light. His eyes are like the rays of dawn. Firebrands stream from his mouth. Sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke pours from his nostrils as from a boiling pot over a fire of reeds. His breath sets coals ablaze and flames dart from his mouth. Strength resides in his neck. Dismay goes before him. The folds of his flesh are tightly joined. They are firm and immovable. His chest is hard as rock, hard as lower millstone. When he rises up, the mighty are terrified. They retreat before his thrashing. The sword that reaches him has no effect, nor does the spear or the dart or the javelin. Iron he treats like straw, and bronze like rotten wood. Arrows do not make him flee. Sling stones are like chaff. A club seems to him but a piece of straw. He laughs at the rattling of the lance. His undersides are jagged potsherds, leaving a trail in the mud like a threshing sledge. He makes the depths churn like a boiling cauldron and stirs up the sea like a pot of ointment. Behind him he leaves a glistening wake. One would think the deep had white hair. Nothing on earth is his equal. A creature without fear. What is that thing? What about the behemoth in Job 40? Well, a behemoth. They try to say this is a hippopotamus. Well, read this a little bit with me. Look at the behemoth which I made along with you and which feeds on grass like an ox. What strength he has in his loins. What power in the muscles of his belly. His tail sways like a cedar tree. Now, wait a minute here. You ever looked at a hippopotamus's tail? His tail sways like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are close knit. His bones are tubes of bronze. His limbs are like rods of iron. He ranks first among the works of God, yet his maker can approach him with his sword. What are those animals that Job, who probably lived back around the time of Genesis, wrote about in his poetic book about the greatness and the power of God? We could go on and on with this, which we won't. I refer you to Dr. Brad Harrub in Nashville at Focus Press, a PhD in neurobiology from the University of Tennessee. He pointed me in the right direction for a lot of this stuff. But we've got stuff from ancient poets like Herodotus about flying reptiles and all kinds of other stuff. Just let me say this. Don't buy it just because they tell you you're stupid if you don't believe in the religion of the origin of the species through natural selection. Which faith, and I'm using that term correctly, which faith is really more believable? You decide. I hope this lesson has strengthened your faith in God and in the Scriptures. If we can help you today to respond to God's invitation, please come as we stand together.